I create a Word document that I'm going to do a screen share with. We're going to read through it. And then at the end of the reading through the document, I will be able to email it to everybody, which I do recommend because reading all this at once is a bit overwhelming. So I want to extend that time to everybody to reflect back on their own, read through it, take it in at your own pace. All right, so I'll start. We have a pretty good amount of people here, and then people come in, they just miss the beginning and they can read that on their own. So I will do my screen share. Okay, so this part right here is actually from the description of the event itself, but fear of abandonment is an overwhelming worry that people close to you will leave. Anyone can develop a fear of abandonment. It could be deeply rooted in a traumatic experience you had as a child or a distressing relationship in adulthood. Maybe you have already recognized abandonment issues that lie in yourself, or maybe it's still lying hidden under a more pressing life emotion or feeling. The feeling of abandonment is fear-based. Since fear is a more commonly recognized human experience, it can overshadow the core root of any unhealed abandonment triggers. This could seep in and affect partnerships, friendships, work relationships, family relationships, and dynamics. This is a perfect example of why I think the emotional wheel would be great with this reflection back on this document. Emotional abandonment is a subjective emotional state in which people feel undesired, left behind, insecure, or discarded. Abandonment issues stem from a fear of loneliness, which can be a phobia or a form of anxiety. Common signs of abandonment issues include giving too much or being overly eager to please, personal life and in relationships, jealousy in your relationship or of others. So looking outward into relationships of friends you may have or family and feeling a sense of jealousy of that projected idea of what you think they have. Trouble trusting your partner's intentions, feeling insecure about your relationship, having difficulty in feeling intimate emotionally, needing to control or be controlled by your partner, always wanting to please others, being a people pleaser, an inability to trust others, pushing others away to avoid rejection, feeling insecure in romantic partnerships and friendships, codependency, excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner. Signs of codependency include difficulty making decisions in a relationship, difficulty identifying your feelings, difficulty communicating in a relationship, valuing the approval of others more than valuing yourself. Sorry, guys, I have to let someone in. Okay. Lacking trust in yourself and having poor self-esteem. Somewhere along the line, you were hurt so bad that you could have stopped trusting your instincts and became fearful of someone else doing the same. It's a natural human response to protect ourselves, whether you have the awareness to it or not. These natural human responses to protect ourselves are usually functioning out of our control or awareness. And then I put running in the background of our subconscious minds. This reason is why it is so important to take the time to become self-aware and restructure that very natural human response. And then I put, I will ask if you can make yourself aware to stop and challenge this reaction. So in this self-awareness journey, we all come to different points at different times. So you may have recognized these very things within yourself or in relationships that may have failed. Looking back and reflecting and saying like, oh, maybe, I was afraid that they were going to leave me. So subconsciously, I kind of sabotaged the relationship. I may have unknowingly created havoc in the relationship because I think that's how someone shows me value, right? So it's like a distorted kind of idea that you can have when it comes to being in codependent relationships or relationships that were traumatic. These are certain things that I want everybody to just kind of, if you haven't already, just take the time and be aware with yourself and challenge yourself and see if you can recognize any of these traits, because they're very common to have coming out of abusive relationships. Some ways to overcome abandonment issues in relationships. get clear on emotional responsibility. And if anybody's attended my emotional event, this is that very thing, right? Identifying your emotions so you can take accountability for your emotional reaction. If you struggle with abandonment issues, you probably have an intense desire to feel taken care of. I can relate to that. So I personally know how maybe light bulb moment that can be. This feeling is completely legitimate, right? However, it will distort your paradigm of personal responsibility, right? So that's a pretty powerful sentence. If you can identify that you feel the need to be taken care of, just know that the paradigm of your personal responsibility is distorted. Take it how it resonates, let it sink in. This is very common in neglect and abandonment in childhood, causing you to have to reparent yourself as an adult. The deep emotional trigger you feel inside, this can be unknowingly, compels you to look to a relationship to be the answer to your problems. For example, your body manages your fear of abandonment by placing the responsibility on someone else to behave a certain way to make you feel secure. You panic if that person does not perform perfectly. Your partner, friends, family, boss, coworker can also become your anxiety reliever. And reassurance is the basis of your security, right? So the awareness to know that you could possibly be doing this and reassuring, okay, this is just a trauma response from my abandonment issues. That's what I kind of meant by that, by giving yourself back the basis of your security. Consequently, when someone close to you that you care about is having a bad week, you are an emotional wreck. If you can identify with that, that's letting you know right there, there's too close of an emotional tie. Either you're taking on another person's emotional state, or that person is taking over for you and you're not responsible for your emotional state, however it looks, right? To stop this emotional reactivity, you need to assume complete ownership of your feelings. And that sentence, I just kind of want to pause for a second because that sentence is a little aggressive. And if you know how I am, I try to always find the silver lining and find like a nice way to phrase things. But you do need to assume complete ownership of your feelings. That means it doesn't mean you're conquering and you're figuring it out. It's the awareness. Start at the awareness. If you're solid about making the awareness of recognizing what that emotional reactivity is or what your emotional state is, you're already taking responsibility. So I don't want people to feel like, oh, but I don't know what to do. So how am I going to take responsibility? Awareness, it starts with the awareness. That's where the responsibility starts. And then you figure it out from there. People will trigger your insecurities, but it is not their job to make you feel better about yourself. It is your responsibility to cultivate a healthy mind that believes the best of yourself. To insist that your partner be emotionally responsible for you is asking that person to take on something that is not within their power to do. Accept 100% accountability for your reactions instead of blaming someone else for your anxiety. If you have ever had someone do this to you, you would understand why you would not want to do the same to another. And the reason why I mention that is because when you're with a narcissist, I'm assuming a lot of people that are in this event today have been in abusive situations. Narcissism is an umbrella, unfortunately. It doesn't mean that they're all the same and everybody's experienced the same type of trauma. And I apologize, I have people in the room, the waiting room. Okay. But what I wanted to accentuate about this is, and I didn't want to shadow the idea that I'm saying when you're around someone who's abusive, you still have to take responsibility for yourself and not them. I did want to mention that because there is a difference. This is more for when you're not actually in an abusive situation. This is recognizing this coming out of it and trying to identify where your abandonment lies. So I did want to point that out because I think I would be triggered if I was still in my situation and someone kind of said that. I'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? So again, it's my awareness from how I felt in the past and the stages that I know I went through. I just wanted to mention that. And then I put correct idealistic expectations. Subconsciously, people with an abandonment history are consequently looking to compensate for what they lost in childhood. I recognize that for myself as well. When people are hurt, they feel like they are owed something. Again, I understand that. And then I put enter the unrealistic expectations, whatever that applies to for you. The burden to repay the past emotional debt is often placed on the significant other. That person is put on a pedestal and clutched tightly. The relationship becomes addictive because that person possesses something you need. And I also want to mention here, if you're following with where I'm going with this, most of this that we see in other people is our perception. So keep in mind that if you have abandonment issues that go all the way back to childhood, my abandonment issues go all the way back to childhood because I was literally abandoned at the age of 3. So throughout my life, I was in foster homes, I was in shelters, and people came and went. I didn't feel like anybody had any type of security on me. I never knew what was happening. So at that age, it was just a mechanism that formed within me because I had to survive my environment. So my body did what it had to do. But now as an adult, I have to look back and say, okay, I never understood what the healthy standards of that was. So I know my abandonment issues are raging and I don't know where they seeped into as an adult. So these type of things are those very things that I wanted to point out. Now, in adulthood, this unrealistic expectation that my partner was going to be my savior of some sort and I was going to be repaid for this horrible childhood I had because something was owed to me. Again, I understand that. And that was the mindset that was created from when I was a child. So now as an adult, I'm going to revisit that and say, okay, that's not realistic. I'm not 4, I'm not 5, I'm not 6 years old, so I can make better decisions and more realistic expectations or idealistic expectations. So that's where I really wanted to point out why this is so important, because some people have had traumatic childhoods and have had abandonment issues since childhood. It doesn't mean you were literally abandoned. It could have been something that happened that caused an abandonment issue to form within you. Again, everybody's trauma is different, but we can all suffer from issues like this based on what we've been through in our lives. So I just want to mention that as well. Fear of abandonment and love addiction go hand in hand. Love addicts search for that constant fix. They use people to make them feel whole or define them. Again, I understand that because that's where we feel value when we're abandoned, is when someone makes us feel whole or like we have definition to ourselves. They rely on their partner to be their source of well-being and substance. Unfortunately, the relationship high only medicates pain temporarily. For one, this expectation puts an immense amount of pressure on one person. Secondly, you will encounter disappointment because no human being can satisfy every longing in your heart. This is also a time, usually 2 to 3 months, when one's mask falls off. So that's what I'm referring to in narcissism. You know, when, and I know people who have done research on narcissism, you probably already know this, but I'm going to just reiterate it. Narcissists tend to look for people who need help and people in need. And there are signs of abandonment issues that you can pick up in people, because I freaking pick up on it now. And of all of the things that I've worked through in myself, I notice it in other people blaringly loud. And I'm just like, oh man, that sucks, because I know how much work I put into myself to find all these little things. And in my opinion, it's just so identifying when you find someone who hasn't become self-aware at all. You'll pick up these red flags. These were red flags. I was a red flag. When this was an issue for me, I was a red flag. And consistency. That's why I put 2 to 3 months. That's another thing I wanted to mention. When you have abandonment issues, you have a fallacy on what you are looking for. It's very, very common. I still recognize fallacy thoughts within myself, even as I go on and I heal. So this idea that someone's going to help us and sweep us off our feet and be our savior, those are usually toxic people that are trying to take advantage of you. It's my personal opinion, and it's true. And I've found that to be true, not only in just relationships with people and dating, relationships where you have to deal with people on a constant basis. Usually the 3 month mark, you'll identify if they were trying to keep a mask on, and not be their true selves. To break this toxic dependency, you must change the way you primarily get your needs met. What would it look like if you took full responsibility for your happiness? You need to invest in yourself and purposely create the life you desire. For some, this looks like seeking after God, working with a therapist, joining a small group, hey, or a big one, hey, traveling, exercising, creating new life goals, learning a new skill, diversifying relationships, or starting a new career. Or if you're a woman, you dye your hair and you cut it. Yes, I wasn't born this blonde with roots. I was born with natural roots. No, I'm just you might just be finding out what you enjoy and what makes you feel fulfilled in life. Try new things. Love yourself in the fashion of taking the time to get to know yourself. We are continuously evolving and never the same exact person throughout our lives. Allow the same analogy to apply with the people around you. It's a great tool in forgiveness. And that's really important, because when we're able to recognize and forgive ourselves and say, you know what, I'm never the same person that I was before, I'm constantly evolving, it's very comforting, and it's a very self-soothing tool to learn for yourself, because it allows you to move on from your past without holding on to regret, without feeling guilty and shameful about things, because you can forgive yourself for ways that you've behaved in the past that you're no longer proud of. And when you're able to do that to yourself, it projects on the people around you in your relationships. So when you learn to forgive yourself, you'll learn to also forgive the people around you. I hope that makes sense. Learn to self-validate. Kind of like all the same stuff, right? Most people who struggle with fear of abandonment are highly reliant on external validation to make them feel confident. They operate from the belief, I need constant reinforcement to verify that people love me so I can feel good about myself. Abandonment wrecks your self-esteem so naturally that there is a huge appeal to look to other people to be your primary source of validation. A deep yearning resides inside your soul to be told you're okay. There is nothing wrong with accepting affirmation. The problem lies when you cannot function without it and continually need people to resuscitate you emotionally. Do you have issues when someone disagrees or disapproves of you? The fact is, sometimes we do not receive the positive feedback we desire. Learning to anchor yourself instead of relying on others to prop you up. Approval seeking is a fruitless endeavor. It will never satisfy. Besides, no amount of praise will convince you of your significance if you don't believe it yourself. When you self-validate, it will force you to get clear on who you really are instead of defining yourself based on how people treat you. Do not give people the power to determine your self-worth. Be authentic. Have you discarded your true self? I know I had. Do you misrepresent yourself or hold back in relationships? Abandonment can disrupt the development of a person's individuality because they believe the lie that says they are not good enough. As a result, they adopt counterfeit identities, and their sense of self becomes fluid. And I hope you know what I mean by fluid. It flows, it doesn't stop. There's no boundaries, right? With fluid, it just seeps until something stops it. So I wanted to reiterate why I was using that wording. They often adjust themselves to fit the desires of people around them. I did this, so I totally understand. Individuals who struggle with fear of abandonment are afraid to be authentic in relationships because they think their differences will threaten the stability of the connection. They are willing to lose themselves in exchange for approval and attention. Instead of genuineness, they aim for a watered down, palpable versions of themselves to achieve sameness. Again, the wording. I am a big word person. Watered down, palpable version of yourself. Does that sound good? No. So if you identify with this, I purposely put different wording in it because I want it to hit differently, and I want it to, and that sounds mean too. I don't want it to give you an uppercut or like a rib shot. What I mean is I want it to shine differently. We'll stick with that. I want it to shine differently. They appease their partner to avoid causing waves. They believe one wrong word or mistake could cause the relationship to end. This is a big lingering effect with dealing with a narcissist. Again, when you're with a narcissist, you constantly feel like you're walking on eggshells. So for you to assume that when you're not around that narcissist or that abusive person, that you still don't behave that way with other relationships, no. We bring those type of traits with us because we formed it as a protection mechanism, and our body's going to use it to make sure that we're okay. That's how much we love ourselves. Has anybody ever heard of that? That we love ourselves so much that our body is constantly healing itself. It's constantly doing things to keep us alive, right? How awesome our bodies are, that our bodies are working so hard 24/7 to make sure that we're at our best. So you do love yourself. You just didn't know it yet. Sorry. Okay, I had to squeeze that in. People pleasing will result in a lifetime of walking on eggshells and putting up with bad behavior. Do not compromise your originality. Abandoning yourself is a toxic preservation strategy. It was formed as a defense mechanism to adapt to an uncomfortable, toxic dealing with someone or people.